Literally everyone and their mother has obsessed over the absolute unit of a TV show that is Breaking Bad. It's honestly not a mystery why this thing is such a total vibe. The squad racked up 16 Emmys and basically broke the internet with perfect critic and fan scores. The fact that we haven't talked about this masterpiece yet is a straight-up crime. But today, we're finally fixing that mistake for real. I'm hitting you with a play-by-play of the whole story so you're caught up. Who knows, you might actually learn a little something along the way. The whole thing goes down in Albuquerque, where we meet Walter White. He's a certified genius chemist who's stuck in a major rut as a broke high school teacher. Then you've got his wife, Skylar, who is a supportive queen, a great mom, and a math whiz. They got a baby on the way and a 15-year-old son. Walt Jr. deals with cerebral palsy, but he's a total boss and doesn't let it stop him. Finally, we've got Jesse Pinkman, Walt's former student turned low-level meth cook. Jesse is a chaotic hothead who is basically failing at life, just like Walt. There are plenty of other characters, but these are the main ones you need to know. So, let's get right into the action and see how this mess starts. The pilot kicks off with a wild flash-forward that is honestly peak drama. I'd say spoilers, but the show is 17 years old, so you should be clued in. You're probably wondering why this dude is standing in the desert in his tidy whities. The real tea is how he even ended up in such a crazy situation. See, Walt just hit his 50th birthday, and it was a total snooze fest. It definitely wasn't as hype as driving a getaway RV while half naked. Most chem teachers are chill with a normal life, a house, and a family. But Walt isn't your basic teacher. He's actually a high-key genius. His past research literally won a Nobel Prize, yet he's got nothing to show for it. All those years of big brain work resulted in some sad veggie bacon for breakfast. The poor guy doesn't even get his birthday off and has to deal with annoying teens. He tries to teach them that chemistry is really just the study of change. And honestly, Walt is about to go through a massive glow-up, or maybe a glow-down. To make matters worse, he's working a side hustle at a car wash just to pay bills. Since Skylar is on maternity leave, they are seriously hurting for some extra cash. Walt is out here grinding and doing the most, even if it's super embarrassing. One of his students even catches him cleaning tires and trolls him for it. After a brutal day, he comes home to a surprise party he definitely wasn't feeling. The guest list includes Hank and Marie, who are basically family royalty. Hank is a big-shot DEA agent, which is a major plot point for later. Hank puts on the news to flex a recent meth bust they pulled off. When Walt hears there was $700K on the table, he gets a wild idea. He asks Hank for a ride-along to see the action, and the seed is officially planted. The next day at the car wash, Walt totally collapses and ends up in the ER. That's when the doctor drops the most devastating news on him. With a terminal diagnosis, Walt finally snaps and tells his boss to shove it. Fun fact, the actor playing the boss is actually a real-life scientist. Walt finally goes on that ride-along with Hank and his partner, Gomez. They're hitting a lab run by a guy known on the streets as Captain Cook. While the feds move in, Walt spots a familiar face jumping out a window. It's Jesse Pinkman, and instead of snitching, Walt decides to track him down. He finds Jesse and hits him with a proposal that is absolutely unhinged. Walt knows the science, and Jesse knows the game, so it's a match. Walt is broke, dying, and desperate, so he's seeing nothing but dollar signs. Jesse is his golden ticket into the sketchy world of underground crime. He has to low-key blackmail Jesse to get him on board, but it works. They get their gear together and snag an RV to use as a mobile lab. They head deep into the desert to start their first big cooking session. This is when the iconic underwear scene finally happens for the fans. They cook up a batch of glass that is purer than anything else out there. Jesse is so hyped that he calls his connect, Crazy 8, to come check it. Crazy 8 shows up with his cousin Emilio, and things get tense fast. Emilio recognizes Walt from the bust and thinks he's a snitch. To save his skin, Walt offers to show them his secret cooking method. Instead, he creates a toxic gas that knocks them both out cold. Walt grabs a mask and peels out with 2 bodies in the back. All that drama happened in just 1 episode, which is totally wild. The second episode reveals the shocker that Crazy 8 is actually still breathing. Walt tries to act normal at breakfast, but Jesse almost ruins the vibe. Jesse calls the house pretending to be a salesman, which is a total fail. He tells Walt he hasn't cleaned up the mess because he's totally freaked out. Walt says he'll handle it after school and heads out to his day job. Skylar knows something is SUS and hits redial to see who called. She gets Jesse's cringy voicemail, which is honestly a classic moment. At school, Walt is a nervous wreck and can barely keep his cool. He sneaks some acid from the lab to help dissolve the evidence later. He heads to Jesse's and finds out the situation has gone south. After catching the escaped prisoner, Walt locks him in the basement. He's officially a criminal now, and there's no going back for him. The guys have to decide who is going to take the final step. They flip a coin, and Jesse gets the job of getting rid of Emilio. Walt tells him to buy a specific plastic bin for the cleanup. While Jesse is shopping, Walt is busy dealing with his actual family life. He and Skylar find out the baby's gender, but things are still super awkward. Walt lies and tells Skylar that Jesse is actually his weed dealer. Skylar isn't buying it and goes to Jesse's house to talk some trash. She tells him to stay away, or she's calling her DEA brother-in-law. As she leaves, Jesse starts dissolving the body in the upstairs bathtub. Huge mistake. The acid eats right through the floor because he's a dummy. Episode 3 starts with him literally scrubbing human remains off the floor. Once the mess is gone, Walt has to deal with the guy in the basement. Jesse gets high to cope. They have a mid-fight, and Jesse leaves. While Walt overthinks things, the drug lie starts to spiral out of control. Now Marie thinks Walt Jr. is the one smoking, which is a mess. Hank takes Jr. to a sketchy motel to scare him away from drugs. Meanwhile, Walt makes a literal pros and cons list for committing murder. He brings Crazy 8 a sandwich, but collapses again because he's sick. When he wakes up, they actually have a heart-to-heart about life. Walt almost lets him go, but then he notices a piece of a plate is missing. He realizes Crazy 8 is planning to shank him the moment he's free. Walt goes back down, calls out the lie, and things get ugly fast. He ends up using a bike lock to finish the job in self-defense. He goes home to a worried Skylar and says he has a huge confession. The next episode, Cancer Man, shows the family trying to be normal. But during a barbecue, the truth finally comes out. Walt has cancer. Junior takes it super hard, and the whole vibe of the family shifts. Walt is looking at a $5,000 bill just for a doctor's consultation. He needs way more cash than the small change Jesse is bringing in. Jesse tries to go home to his parents, but they aren't having it. They're worried he'll be a bad influence on his perfect younger brother. Jesse gets a call from his crew and manages to sell some more product. He brings Walt $4,000, but Walt is still being a total jerk to him. With the money, Walt learns his cancer is treatable but super expensive. The treatment costs $90,000, and Junior tells him to stop being a quitter. Walt attends a party for his billionaire ex-partner, Elliot. It's a huge reminder of the life and money Walt missed out on. Elliot offers him a job just to pay for his treatment, which hurts Walt's pride. Walt totally shuts down the help from Skylar and the Schwartzes because his ego is way too massive for charity. Meanwhile, Jesse tries to go legit, but ends up wearing a giant dollar bill costume like a total loser. He eventually snaps, grabs Badger, and they hit the desert to cook, but Jesse's perfectionism makes him trash every single batch. They get into a massive blow-up, and Jesse bounces, realizing he's low-key helpless without Walt's big brain. Back at the ranch, Junior gets busted trying to score some brews, which triggers a super awkward family intervention. Everyone takes a turn with the talking pillow, but Walt drops the mic by saying he'd rather die than be a vegetable. He pulls a total 180 the next morning and agrees to treatment, but it's mostly just a cover for his new side hustle. Gretchen calls to check in, but Walt is already back on his grind and hunting down Jesse to get the lab running. This is the moment he stops being Mr. White and starts leaning hard into that legendary Heisenberg energy. The chemo starts hitting him for real, and he decides to shave his head, completing the iconic look. The new plan is simple. Walt handles the chemistry and Jesse handles the hustle, but they quickly realize they're small time. To move up the food chain, they meet with Tuco Salamanca, a certified psycho who makes them look like a lemonade stand. Tuco isn't about that fair trade life. He beats Jesse half to death and jacks their entire supply. Walt isn't taking that L, so he storms Tuco's spot with a bag of what looks like meth, but is actually explosive mercury. He blows the place sky high and demands his cash, which actually earns him some respect from the madman. Heisenberg is officially born, and they agree to deliver 2 pounds a week, which is a total mission impossible. They can't get enough meds to keep up, so they decide to pull a heist for a massive barrel of methylamine. Walt whips up some thermite that literally melts through steel like butter, so they can break into the warehouse. They snag the goods, escape in the nick of time, and deliver a massive batch of blue glass to Tuco. The vibe check goes south when Tuco loses his mind and beats one of his own goons to death right in front of them. Season 2 kicks off with Walt doing the math and realizing he needs exactly $737,000 to set his family up for life. Tuco comes back even more unhinged, demanding they fix his dead friend, which is obviously not how science works. Terrified for their lives, Jesse buys a piece, but Walt wants to use ricin for a silent but deadly exit for Tuco. Before they can even move, Tuco kidnaps them and drags them out to a middle-of-nowhere shack in the desert. They meet Uncle Hector, a creepy old dude in a wheelchair who only talks by ringing a bell. Walt tries to poison Tuco's burrito with the ricin, but Hector rings his bell and warns the nephew just in time. Hank is out there playing detective, following Jesse's car right to the hideout just as things get violent. Jesse gets a shot off on Tuco, and then Hank shows up and finishes him in a legendary 1v1 shootout. Walt and Jesse go into full stealth mode to escape, but now they need a cover story for where they've been. Walt decides the best move is to wander into a grocery store completely naked and blame it on fugue state amnesia. He plays the hospital staff like a fiddle, while Jesse gets a fake alibi from a local working girl named Wendy. The DEA tries to get Hector to snitch, but the old man has OG rules and refuses to say a single word. Skylar is starting to smell the cap, though, and the distance between her and Walt is getting wider by the second. Walt tries to play Father of the Year by making breakfast, but it's giving major guilty conscience vibes. Jesse gets kicked out by his parents and ends up living in the RV like a total nomad for a minute. He demands his 50-50 cut from Walt, and the two have a pathetic wrestling match over the bag of cash. The good news is Walt's cancer is actually shrinking, but the bad news is the medical bills are absolutely insane. Jesse finds a new spot next to a girl named Jane, and there's an instant spark between the two. They scale up the business by hiring Jesse's friends, Badger, Skinny Pete, and Combo, to hit the streets. Skinny Pete gets robbed by some crackheads, and Walt tells Jesse he needs to handle it to keep their street cred. Jesse goes to get his money back from the thieves, but ends up babysitting their neglected kid and playing peekaboo. The thief ends up getting his head crushed by a heavy ATM machine while Jesse just watches in total shock. Jesse grabs the cash and calls 911 for the kid, while the street thinks he's a cold-blooded killer who crushed a guy's head. Walt has a brutal confrontation with Gretchen, basically telling her to go kick rocks for stealing his life's work. He lies to Skyler and says the Schwartzes cut them off, making himself look like the victim once again. Hank gets promoted to El Paso, but sees a severed head on a turtle and realizes the cartel is a different breed of scary. Skyler goes back to work for her old boss, Ted, and you can already tell that situation is going to be messy. Badger gets caught in a sting, so they hire Saul Goodman, a criminal lawyer who is basically a professional loophole finder. They kidnap Saul and take him to the desert to scare him, but he ends up becoming their most valuable player. Saul finds a fall guy to go to prison for them, keeping the Heisenberg legend alive while keeping Walt out of jail. Jesse and Jane officially become a thing, but things get complicated when she reveals she's a recovering addict. Walt thinks he's seeing his death sentence on an X-ray, so he and Jesse head out for a marathon 4 days out cook. Walt starts stressing about his dwindling stash after Saul and the money launderers take their massive cut. He decides he needs to cook a monster batch right now, so he lies to Jesse, saying their chemicals are about to expire. To dodge Skyler's questions, he uses the classic visiting my mom excuse and heads for the desert. Out in the wild, Jesse accidentally leaves the keys in the ignition, and the RV battery slow batches its way to zero. After a marathon cook, they realize they've made a cool $672,000, but they are totally stranded in the heat. A massive fire and a dead phone later, Walt almost loses his mind and prepares to accept his fate in the dirt. Jesse actually manages to inspire him, calling him a science robot who needs to build a way out. Walt uses some MacGyver skills to build a DIY battery out of spare parts and coins to jumpstart the engine. Back in town, Walt gets the shock of his life. His tumor shrank by 80%, and he's officially in remission. Instead of being happy, Walt has a total midlife crisis at his own party and tries to get Junior drunk. He gets obsessed with DIY house projects, even digging a crawl space that will definitely be important later. Meanwhile, things get dark when Jesse's friend Combo gets gunned down by a rival kid on a bicycle. Jesse spirals back into drugs, and Jane ends up relapsing with him, introducing him to the heavy stuff. Saul sets Walt up with a mysterious big-timer named Gus Fring, who runs a literal chicken empire. Gus almost passes on Walt because Jesse is a chaotic junkie, but Walt begs for a chance to prove himself. Walt gets a now or never call to deliver the meth, but it happens right as Skyler goes into labor. He chooses the money over the birth, delivering the goods for $1.2 million, but missing his daughter's arrival. Skyler's boss, Ted, is the one who steps up at the hospital, which is a major red flag for Walt's marriage. Junior started a donation site for his dad, and Saul uses it as a genius way to laundry Walt's dirty drug money. In a wild twist of fate, Walt meets Jane's dad at a bar, and they bond over their difficult family members. Walt goes to Jesse's to help him, but he accidentally moves Jane while she's high, and she starts choking. He watches her die and does absolutely nothing to stop it, which is easily his most villainous move yet. Jesse wakes up devastated, and Mike shows up to scrub the crime scene before the cops and Jane's dad arrive. Walt finds a broken Jesse in a trap house and hauls him off to rehab to get his head right. During surgery, a drugged-up Walt accidentally mentions his second phone, and Skyler finally catches him in the lie. She pieces together all his BS and tells him to pack his bags and get out of her life for good. Jane's grieving father goes back to work as an air traffic controller and accidentally causes a mid-air plane collision. Season 3 opens with the Salamanca twins coming for revenge, marking Heisenberg's head on a hit list. Walt is living in a sad apartment, but he eventually tells Skylar the truth. He's a high-level drug dealer. She agrees to keep his secret if he just signs the divorce papers and leaves the kids alone. Gus tries to lure Walt back in with a $3 million offer, but Walt is trying to go straight to save his family. Walt snaps at a cop over a cracked windshield and gets pepper sprayed, proving he's losing his cool. Jesse gets out of rehab and uses his drug money to lowball by his parents' house right out from under them. Walt tries to force his way back into the family home with a pizza, which ends up famously on the roof. The twins show up at Walt's house to axe him, but Gus calls them off at the last second to protect his investment. Skylar decides to get back at Walt by starting an affair with Ted, and she makes sure Walt knows it. Jesse cooks a batch on his own and tries to sell it to Gus, but Gus uses it as bait to get Walt back. Walt loses it at Ted's office, and Mike has to literally carry him away before he catches a case. He even tries to hit on the school principal, which is a total cringe moment that fails spectacularly. Gus takes Walt on a drive and reveals a literal space-age underground lab hidden under a laundromat. The lab is top tier, totally flawless, and Walt is hyped, but he still says nah. He tells Gus the meth game basically trashed his entire family life. Skylar is still vibing with Ted and wondering if Walt will ever back off. Well, actually, he totally does. She gets home to find Walt bounced, his gear packed, and divorce papers ready. Looks like he is finally taking Gus up on that massive offer. At Saul's spot, Walt and Jesse link up where Walt drops the other half of the cash. But he straight up promises that this is his final play. That is the last bit of bread you will ever make in this biz. I don't know if he was being cold or just keeping it real, but whatever. Hank is getting low-key obsessed with finding that RV, which leads him to Combo's mom. Inside her pad, Hank snoops around and eventually clocks a photo of Jesse. He knows for a fact that Jesse is his main target. Walt gets into the groove of his new lab and quickly bonds with his helper, Gail. The lab is clean, chill, and professional. It's a massive 180 from the total chaos he and Jesse used to deal with. Speaking of Jesse, he cooks and brings his new product to his old crew. He promises things will be different this time, way safer and way smarter. And guess what? They actually say yes. Across town, though, Hank keeps digging into Pinkman. He's convinced the RV owned by Combo's mom is now Jesse's ride. So he starts a stakeout. Knowing Jesse knows Walt, Hank calls him to ask about the RV. Walt obviously caps, but now he knows he has to ditch the evidence fast. Meanwhile, the twins show up at the chicken spot, just sitting there being creepy. Gus finally meets them and promises to sweeten the pot at sunset. Walt rushes to the lot and finds out the RV can be scrapped. They head there fast, but Badger tips off Jesse, who races to stop them. Jesse thinks Walt is trying to gatekeep the business, but Walt explains the heat. They lock themselves, and just as Hank pulls up, Old Joe blocks the search because the RV is a private home. Hank calls for a warrant, and the boys are basically cooked. But Walt thinks fast and cooks up a seriously dirty plan. I mean, it's foul, but it totally works. I'm sorry to say your wife was in a bad accident. She's being flown to the hospital right now. With Hank gone, Joe crushes the RV, leaving Hank totally in the dark. At the sunset meet, Gus tells the twins Walt is off limits. But since they want blood, Gus points them at a new target, Hank. The next episode starts with Hank in a total rage over the fake call. Knowing there is one man behind it, he storms Jesse's house. He gives him a massive beatdown that lands him in the hospital. Walt and Saul find Jesse just as heated as Hank was. I'll give them exactly what they want. Skylar begs Walt to calm Jesse down so he doesn't ruin Hank's life. She reminds him that Hank is still family. Well, actually, Walt signed those papers, so he's not. But things are definitely weighing on Walt at the lab. He asks Gus to swap Gale for Jesse to boost the vibes. Gus agrees, and just like that, the OGs are back together. Well, actually, I forgot about those twins. At the office, Hank gets suspended and loses his peace. Then he gets a creepy call warning him about the hit. 2 men are coming to end you right now. The twins attack, and Hank rams one of them with his truck. They shoot him down as the first twin passes out. The survivor wants a flashy finish, so he grabs his axe. This gives Hank time to reload and score a legendary headshot. After leaving the hospital, Jesse tells Walt his brother-in-law is in surgery. Walt rushes over to be there for the family. The feds explain the attack was a cartel hit, but we knew that. Gomez is shocked Hank won without a gun, making Marie super suspicious. The twin who got pinned actually lived, but lost both his legs. When Walt peeks in, the guy tries to crawl out of bed. Meanwhile, Gus gets a call from a nervous cartel boss. The boss thinks Gus set the whole thing up. Man, that guy is actually pretty sharp. At the hospital, Walt stays close while Jesse waits to cook. When Gus calls, Walt lies about why he's late. But Walt should know better because Gus shows up at the hospital. He acts like a nice local businessman supporting the police. I only wish I could do more for him. He's not just there for Walt, though. He's there to finish the twin while the boss gets raided. In a few days, Gus's master plan is totally coming together. Walt and Jesse are deep in the zone, moving weight with ease. The lab is a well-oiled machine. Who even needs Gale anyway? At the hospital, Gomez tells Hank the blue stuff is everywhere. The product is back, and the kingpin is still out there. Hank is restless because someone warned him before the hit. His legs are toast, and the rehab costs a fortune. I wonder who has the bag to pay for that. Walt thanks Gus for the save, but he knows the truth. Gus redirected the hit to Hank to clear the field. To sweeten things, Gus offers a massive $12 million yearly deal. With that cash flowing, Skylar offers to pay Hank's medical bills. She's getting way too good at the lying game. I guess she really did learn from the best. The next episode, Fly, is a bit of a toss-up. Basically, Walt spends an hour obsessing over a bug in the lab. He claims it's a hazard, but it's really about his mental state. He almost spills the tea about Jane to Jesse. I know some people hate it, but it's a low-key masterpiece. In ABQ, Hank is hating his therapy and getting nowhere. Marie gives Skylar the bill, and Skylar tells Walt. But she wants the money to be totally clean, so I guess it's her way or nothing. Walt takes her to Saul's office, and the vibes are awkward. Clearly his taste in women is the same as his lawyer's. Skylar wants to launder the cash through the old car wash. It makes sense since Walt used to work there. Walt isn't sure about dragging her into the crime life. Even though Jesse is back, he's staying clean this time. He tries to get his boys to sell at meetings, but he actually connects with a girl named Andrea. She has a son named Brock and a brother, Tomas. Jesse realizes Tomas was the kid who took out Combo. He finds the kid selling the very meth they cook. Jesse knows his bosses are using the kid who killed his friend. He wants to use poison to get back at Gus. Walt refuses to go that far against the boss. Worried Jesse will spiral, Walt goes to Saul for help. They plan to have Jesse arrested to cool him off. But before that, Mike shows up at Walt's place. Mike drops one of the hardest speeches in the whole show. He tells Walt to stop taking half measures with Jesse. It's a truly iconic moment for the series. Mike and Victor take Jesse to a meeting with Gus. Gus promises no more kids, and Jesse has to play ball. That night, the kid Tomas is found dead. Jesse sees the news and knows exactly who did it. He skips work to hunt down the dealers. Walt sees the news and bails on dinner immediately. Jesse confronts the dealers, but Walt suddenly mows them down. Yeah, I don't think Gus is going to let that slide. Jesse goes into hiding while Walt tries to save their skins. He begs for a pass, reminding Gus he wanted Jesse gone anyway. The next day, Gale is back in the lab. Victor is watching them like a hawk now. That night, Gus visits Gale at his house. He tells him he needs to learn Walt's secret recipe. just in case something happens to Walt. Saul sets up a secret meeting for the boys. They decide that Walt has to take out Gale. If Gale is gone, Gus can't afford to kill Walt. Later that night, Victor lures Walt to the lab. Walt knows it's a hit, but he has a plan. He calls Jesse and tells him to do the job. Jesse has to kill Gale to keep them alive. Man, I know he had to, but it's so sad. Gale just wanted to cook and drink his tea. Victor finds Gale dead and the police on the way. He grabs Jesse and brings him back to the lab. They all sit there waiting for the big boss. Walt feels safe because he's the only one who can cook. But then, Victor starts a batch himself. Gus arrives and says absolutely nothing. Walt starts rambling, trying to prove why they're still useful. Gus just puts on a suit and grabs a blade. The boys think it's over, but Gus surprises everyone. He takes out Victor instead in a total bloodbath. Yeah, I knew he was cold, but that was wild. Covered in blood, Gus tells them to get back to work. They have to get rid of the body, just like before. The next episode is a bit of a breather. Skylar tries to buy the wash, but the owner hates Walt. He wants a crazy amount of money for the place. Walt wants that spot now more than ever. They get it through some serious legal trickery. Also, Hank is still struggling with his recovery, and Marie is back to her old shoplifting habits. Jesse is throwing a nonstop rager at his house. But honestly, give a guy a break after Gale. The next scene starts in the back of a truck. Mike handles some hijackers in a total boss move. Gus is finally ending the people stealing his product. Hank and Marie have the whites over for dinner. They tell the fake gambling story to explain the cash. Walt sneaks into Hank's room and finds a file. He sees a note dedicated to WW. I wonder who that could possibly be. Hank thinks he found his man in Gale. But Walt's ego can't handle someone else getting the credit. Maybe the real genius is still out there. That was a seriously close call for Walt. The next day, Walt finds Jesse's house a total wreck. Jesse is worried he left evidence at the crime scene. Mike and Gus are getting tired of Jesse's drama. So Gus makes Mike take Jesse on the road. Walt tries to confront Gus, but gets nowhere. Jesse and Mike hit dead drops all over the state. At the last stop, Jesse stops a fake robbery. He earns a little bit of respect from Mike. But we know it was all a setup by Gus. Back home, Skylar wants Walt to move back in. She's finally embracing the dark side a little bit. At the lab, Jesse is splitting his time now. This makes Walt super paranoid about Gus's plan. At dinner, Walt drinks too much and talks too much. He tells Hank that Gale was probably just a copycat. His ego is definitely going to be his downfall. Skylar is terrified for the family's safety now. She wants Walt to admit he's in over his head. But Walt reminds her who the boss really is. I'm the one who knocks. After that, Walt gets the keys to the wash. He grills Jesse about what he's doing with Mike. Jesse finally feels like he's a valued player. They find some stolen meth and Gus negotiates. Gus gives Jesse a little pep talk as he leaves. I like to think I'm a good judge of character. Come on, Jesse, don't fall for the trap. Anyway, Hank brings Junior to the chicken spot. While they eat, he casually gets Gus to touch a cup. Why? Well, Hank has a hunch that Gus is in on the whole Gale thing, but we'll touch on that a little later. Back at the lab, Walt pushes Jesse to act to, finish him off. He reminds Jesse that he's close to Gus now, trusted that it's the perfect opportunity to strike. Walt even prepares poison in the lab, and Jesse hides it in a cigarette, waiting for the right moment to poison Gus. At the DEA, Hank meets with the bosses, laying out his case, and Gus is at the center of it all. Although obviously skeptical of Hank's case in the restaurant, the DEA do decide to pull Gus in for a chat. They tell him his fingerprints were found at the scene of a homicide. Gus guesses it's about Gale and explains that Gale was a former recipient of a scholarship that Gus funded through the local college. He says Gale recently invited him over and asked for financial help, which explains why his prints were there. Hank continues to dig, but Gus has all the answers, and once again Hank's case on him looks like a dud. Skyler, meanwhile, begins hiding Walt's money in the crawl space beneath the house, slowly building a wall of bills that nobody can see. Hank later asked Walt for a ride to a mineral show, because boy does that man love his rocks. But this time, he's not wanting to look at those rose quartz. He's wanted to put a tracker on Gus's car. Walt panics, pretends to place the tracker, then walks inside and tells Gus what happened. See, I didn't do it. Do it. I guess he wants to try and look as clean as possible to the DEA. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, Walt puts the tracker on Gus's car and leaves. Later at Jesse's, Walt tries to warn him about Hank's investigation and pushes again for Jesse to kill Gus. Gus has business of his own to tend to, though, like visiting Hector in his nursing home, where we find out why Gus hates the cartel and the Salamancas. Oh man, having your partner killed in cold blood is bad enough, but they also make him stare at his lifeless body for what feels like an eternity. No wonder he hates them all so much. In the hunt, Hank retrieves the GPS tracker from Gus's car, and after reviewing the data, he's bummed to find nothing suspicious. Determined to keep digging, he shifts his focus to Gus's distribution center. So, Skyler has to put on an act to try and soften the blow. You're not allowed to do that. Well, I think I am. No, you're not. Well, you know what they say about opinions, right? Despite the total ditzy shtick, Ted still has to fork out over $600,000 to the IRS. And in fairness, he's lucky that he's got away with that. Gus, meanwhile, has finally made a deal with the cartel. And as a result of this deal, Jesse is to be sent to Mexico to show them how to make Walt's famous blue crystal. When Jesse tells Walt about the plan, it doesn't go well. Walt is furious that Jesse hasn't finished Gus off yet, and the two break out into a fight. After his tussle with Walt, Jesse along with Mike and Gus head to Mexico to meet the big boss. Jesse teaches his cooks how to perfect the blue crystal, but overhears Gus tell one of the cooks that Jesse belongs to the cartel. Luckily, Mike is on hand, and he promises Jesse will be going home, having met and made peace with the guy who pulled the trigger on Gus's partner, Max. But as always with Gus, appearances deceive, and the same drink that he gives the boss is the same drink that kills him. As Gus makes himself throw up to get rid of the powerful poison, a shootout breaks out as the cartel realize that somebody is playing them. Back in Albuquerque, Skyler has used all of Walt's stored money to pay off Ted's tax fraud, with the help of Saul, of course. In the aftermath of the cartel bust-up, Gus and Mike are critically injured, so it's up to Jesse to speed them to a makeshift clinic that Gus had prepared in advance. Gus recovers quickly, but Mike has to stay behind for a week. Jesse is then told that it'll be him who takes over from Walt in the cooking department, and Jesse agrees, but only if Walt is kept alive. For now, though, Walt is the last thing on Gus's mind as he goes to pay Hector a visit to let him know that along with the cartel, the Salamanca bloodline has fallen. The family name dies with you. Things aren't exactly sunshine and rainbows for Skyler either, because Ted might have got the money, but he wants more, buying flash cars and talking about keeping the business afloat. So Saul sends in 2 guys to handle him, the muscle, but that doesn't go so well. Walt then finds out Jesse's been cooking with the boss, so he begs Jesse to help take down Gus, but Jesse shuts him out. And soon after, Walt is dragged to the desert where Gus fires him and tells him, "I will kill your infant daughter." In a blind panic, Walt rushes to Saul to help him and his family disappear with a special guy that he has that can help. And when he rushes home to gather the money to pay for the protection, he finds it all gone. "What? You did? What?" "Walt, I might had to." Walt asks Saul to anonymously warn the DEA about the cartel putting it out on Hank. While it's not true, it will buy Walt more time and keep his family safe. Then Jesse gets the call from Gus that he's been dreading. Mr. White has become too much of a problem. It needs to be fully dealt with, but Jesse refuses to sign off on letting Gus take him out. The next person to call his cell is Andrea, as she tells him that Brock is really ill in the hospital. This is when he notices the poisoned cigarette is gone. Jesse storms into Walt's house, furious. He pulls a gun, screaming that Walt poisoned Brock to manipulate him. "If you think that I am capable of doing this, then go." But Jesse sees sense and realizes Gus has to go. For now, though, he camps out of the hospital, refusing to leave. So Gus turns up trying to get Jesse to go back to work. But like I say, he's not going to budge. And he tries to buy time for Walt to figure out a way to take him out. But how the hell are they ever going to finish him off? Well, we're about to find out, because in the episode Face Off, things are about to bubble over for either Walt or Gus. Walt asks Jesse if there's any place Gus goes without cameras. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere unguarded. Somewhere like Hector Salamanca's nursing home. Walt visits Hector and offers him a final chance at revenge. To get the plan in action, Hector signals that he wants to speak to the DEA. But when they arrive, he spells out insults with his letterboard instead of cooperating. It's all for show, just enough to convince Gus that he's snitching on him. And as expected, Gus takes the bait. He marches to the home with Tyrus with a syringe full of liquid, which will put Hector into a fatal coma. Hector stops him from injecting by staring at him for the first time in years, and of course ringing his bell. Gus emerges from the smoke like some sort of immortal god, but we soon see just like in his day-to-day life. It's all for show. He might have gotten rid of Gus, but there's no time to waste. He and Jesse need to torch the lab before Hank and the DEA get there. Jesse then tells Walt that it wasn't the poison that poisoned Brock, but a plant called Lily of the Valley. So, I guess maybe Walt is innocent, right? Nah. In the Season 5 opener, Live Free or Die, Walt works fast, scrubbing away anything that might link him to Gus's death or to Brock's poisoning. Meanwhile, Mike, still healing from the shootout with the cartel, learns of Gus's death and returns to New Mexico. He finds Jesse and Walt Gunn, ready to finish what Gus started. But the boys talk him down. They've all got a bigger problem now anyway. Gus's work laptop containing all the security footage from the lab has been seized by the cops. And as soon as they look at it, it's going to be game over. They squabble over what to do. And with all the experience of Mike and all the brainpower of Walt, it's actually Jesse who comes up with the best idea. What about a magnet? What magnet? What about it? Walt and Jesse get help from old Joe at the junkyard, rigging an industrial electromagnet in the back of a box truck. They park near the police evidence room and flip the switch. The truck bucks, slams, and the magnet wipes out the laptop. They speed off, ditching the truck, while Walt insists that it worked. At the car wash, Saul approaches Skylar and tells her that Ted is alive. She visits him in the hospital, seeing the halo brace, and hears him whisper that he won't say a word. He's terrified. I never thought I'd feel bad for that guy, but here we are. After making him anonymously tip off the DEA and having Saul aid in the poisoning of Brock, Saul's had enough of working with Walt, but Walt has other ideas. After they team up in the previous episode, Walt and Jesse approach Mike with an offer of a three-way split in a new business. Mike's not buying it. I still don't think he's all that fond of Walt. The problem is they need a new source of the chemicals to make their product, and I don't think now's the time to dust off the thermite and go stealing it by hand. Lydia, who works for the parent company, reaches out to Mike. She wants him to eliminate the 11 men connected to Gus's operation. Loose and she thinks need cutting. Mike's old school and believes because the guys were paid for their silence. But that all changes, though, when the DEA catch wind of all of Mike's offshore accounts. I don't know anything about any money. Turns out that after declining her offer of dealing with the 11 men, she hires one of them to try and take out Mike. But he's far too skilled, so he disposes of the guys who's turned on him and heads to Lydia's home to settle the score. Instead of pulling the trigger, however, he figures that she could be of some use to him, and he calls Walt and tells him he says he's in and that he is a new chemical supplier. Following on into the next episode, Hazard Pay, Mike spends a day visiting the rest of his former men in jail. He tells them that he understands the government has taken away their money, but if they just hold it together, he'll sort out some way to pay them. Back over with the other boys, Walt and Jesse are figuring out ways to actually cook, because in the past they had an RV or, Gus's super lab. But they settle on an unusual but genius idea. Truly, I love this. They begin setting up in strangers' homes, pretending to be pest control, but using the tents as a perfect ventilation system to hide the meth fumes. You know what? The cooks go smoothly. At the car wash, Skylar is barely holding it all together. When Marie arrives to talk about Walt's upcoming birthday, she breaks down. Marie tries to get to the bottom of it and eventually confronts Walt, who hilariously tells her that it's the guilt talking with Skylar because she had an affair with Ted. After the first set of cooks, the money is in and the boys are ready to take their share. Although, I'm not sure Walt is particularly happy by the slice of pie that they're getting. At the big office, Lydia's chemical contact inside the warehouse is arrested. The DEA closes in and she panics. Mike tries to calm her, but trying to calm her is as much use as a chocolate fire guard. After his work on the Fring case and the surrounding arrests in association with it, Hank is offered the promotion at the DEA, but it means that he'll have to step down from his work on the Heisenberg case. What was meant to be a great day for Hank, and more importantly a nice 51st birthday for Walt, is suddenly put on ice as Skylar goes for a little late-night swim. Okay, that's more of a cry for help. What are you doing, Skylar? What's she doing, Walt? She tells Hank and Marie to take the kids to give her and Walt some space. But really she's just trying to get them away from him. There's nothing she can do now. And in her own words, her hands aren't exactly clean, so all she can do is wait. With the contact no longer viable, and the boys needing a steady supply of chemicals, it's Jesse's job to visit the HQ to take a barrel of the stuff. But when Jesse gets the barrel back, the boys realize that there is a shoddy GPS tracker stuck to the barrel. Mike goes crazy, blaming Lydia, and comes to the conclusion that she's more trouble than she's worth. Furious that Lydia might be pulling a fast one, the boys kidnap her and interrogate her about the tracker on the barrel. She swears innocence, but after she pleads to call the DEA to prove herself, the guys realize she was telling the truth after all, and was planted by some heavy-handed idiot in the DEA. Mike's not so sure she should be let off that easy, though, and would rather they just got rid of her completely. They're close to doing just that when Lydia pipes up and tells them that if they want the product, then she's got the mother lode. Obviously interested, the boys hear her out. She explains that a train carrying the stuff crosses a certain part of the New Mexico desert, which is a dead zone, meaning no alerts, no radio, no nothing. She's basically proposing a train robbery. Mike scoffs at this, but Walt is interested. It might be so crazy it might just work. So he begins drafting up a plan to take the 1,000 gallons of chemicals and replace it with 1,000 gallons of water. With that idea of being literally genius, they decide this is what they're going to do. And with the help of the help and Todd, a newcomer, they just might pull it off. But as they're celebrating literally the most expensive heist in human history, a young boy watches them. It's a case of wrong place, wrong time. And thinking that he has to prove himself, Todd takes matters into his own hands. Todd somehow brushes off what he's done like it's nothing. And Jesse, who's still raw after the Brock stuff, takes it out on him. As the DEA begins closing in on Mike, he feels the heat and decides to walk away from the meth business. Jesse soon follows because he just wants a normal life and not to be surrounded by death all the time. They want a clean exit, so they propose selling their share of the chemicals for $5 million each and no more blood on their hands. Jesse even goes around to Walt's house to try and convince him to sell up, but Mr. White goes on to explain he once sold his potential for peanuts and won't ever make that mistake again. Walt takes this to a weird place, though, when he tries to hide the chemicals so the boys can't sell their share. Luckily, though, Mike is one step ahead. He catches and ties Walt up, leaving him in the office while Mike tries to sort out a deal for the remaining stuff. Walt won't take it lying down, though, and burns through all of his brain power and the skin on his wrist to escape before Mike comes back. When he does return, Mike finds the chemicals missing and goes straight for Walt. But Walt has a plan, and this plan suits all parties. In Say My Name, Walt's master plan is to meet Declan, the other big boss, who is a man who needs a whole lot of chemicals, but more importantly wants that blue meth off the market. So he hits the boys with a tasty $15 million bid. Walt, however, has other plans. His idea is to keep the product, give the others $5 million each for their troubles, and to cook for Declan using his distribution network. At first, he thinks he's being taken for a ride, but then he realizes who is standing in front of him. Heisenberg. Declan might have agreed to Walt's big deal, but it's not good news for Mike, even if he's $5 million richer, because Hank has caught Mike's lawyer depositing money into accounts for his former men. So, a warrant is out for his arrest. Walt doesn't hand over Jesse's money straight away. I mean, fair enough. He hasn't even got the cash himself yet, but things end a little more bitterly than they should. To replace Jesse as his assistant, he brings Todd back in and teaches him his ways. Walt then catches wind that not only is there a warrant out for Mike's arrest, but his lawyer is currently snitching. And Walt finally steps up to the plate and does the right thing. Coming for you right now. They're coming. Slow down, Walter. Who? The DEA. Saul has a getaway bag prepared for Mike in case of a scenario like this. So he has Walt pick it up and asks to meet him way out in the sticks. When they meet, Walt demands the names of the 9 men before handing over the bag. Mike refuses, and the tension builds fast. He tears into Walt, blaming him for destroying everything they built with Gus. We had a lab. We had everything we needed. It all ran like clockwork. You could have shut your mouth, cooked. Walt can't take the truth and runs off to fetch a piece, shooting and killing Mike. Then, and only then, does he realize that he could have got the names from Lydia? Let me die in peace. In the next phase, Walt and Todd work in silence. They prepare a barrel of acid to dissolve Mike's body. When Jesse arrives, broken by Mike's death, they had come kind of close over the last few months. Walt, without flinching, tells him that since he chose to walk away from the business, it's no longer his concern, that he should stay out of it. Then, in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, Walt meets Lydia to get the names of the men that still are out there. Knowing the men in prison are a threat, Walt reaches out to Todd's uncle, Jack, asking him to take out every one of them at once, seeing as he has contacts in the prison system and all that. Jack warns him that coordinating simultaneous hits in different prisons won't be a walk in the park, but Walt doesn't care and tells him to do it anyway. Somehow, within 2 minutes, 10 men are dead and the threat is gone. As the money continues to roll in and the business begins to grow, Skylar takes Walt to a storage unit, where she shows him the towering pile of cash that they've been collecting. I think some random on Reddit counted that the money in the storage unit was probably around $69.3 million, which is enough to buy 86.5 car washes. With this in mind, Walt visits Jesse one last time, drops 2 heavy bags filled with money on the floor, then leaves without saying much at all. This time, Walt is done for good. But that all comes crashing down when at another family barbecue, Hank steps into the bathroom and pulls a book from under a stack of magazines. It's a gift the one Gale gave to Walt. Just like that. Are you my star? Hank is finally onto him. Hank is still reeling, realizing that his brother-in-law has been Heisenberg this whole time. Once back at his place, he begins obsessing over the old DEA case files, and all the names lead back to one man, Walter White. Meanwhile, Walt, now retired from the meth business, discusses expanding the car wash with Skylar to move the rest of the money. when Lydia shows up begging for help as the quality of meth has dropped. Walt turns her away, and Skylar tells her to never come back. Also, around this time, Walt's cancer has come back, but that's hardly important. When he finds his book from the toilet missing and a tracker on his car, it is now time to confront Hank. Hank lets him know that sooner or later he'll get Walt. He just has to prove it. After the confrontation in the garage, Walt frantically tries to call Skylar only to realize that Hank is already on the phone with her. Walt rushes to the car wash, but discovers that she's gone to meet with Hank at a diner. Skylar realizes that Hank is more or less forcing her to give a confession, so she storms out of the diner. But if she won't talk to him, maybe she'll talk to her sister. Marie is beside herself and, even for a moment, tries to take Holly away from Skylar. Luckily, though, Hank steps in and tells her to hand Holly back. While all this has been going on, Walt has been in the desert burying their money in a specific location. The coordinates to set location are on the front of a lottery ticket. He can barely keep himself conscious as he tries to wash his sand-covered body, but soon slips and falls into a deep sleep. Well, he didn't have proof, but when Jesse's arrested, Hank sees it as his window into getting Walt. Hank meets with Jesse and lays it all out. He knows Walt is Heisenberg, but Jesse isn't ready to help. And when Saul shows up, Jesse's released from custody. Sensing his moment might have gone, Hank is then invited to a restaurant by Walt and Skylar, where Walt frames Hank's investigation as something that will destroy the family. Skylar insists Walt is out of the business, but Walt slides over a DVD to them, so they head off home to watch it. It's a fake confession, one that accuses Hank of running the Meth Empire and using Walt as his pawn. Hank has been building a Meth Empire for over a year now and using me as his chemist. Walt meets Jesse in the desert and begs him to leave town, with that disappearing guy Walt tried to use earlier. Saul sets things up, but tells Jesse that he can't be smoking weed on this new journey because this guy's really serious. Now, Jesse's hiding out at the house, laying everything out on tape, telling the story from the beginning. Walt calls Jesse, leaves a message, asking to meet at a public plaza, hoping to smooth things over. Hank pushes Jesse to go, wires him up, and reminds him that Walt always protected him before, so doubts anything bad will happen. So he walks into the plaza, scanning the crowd. He freezes when he spots a man nearby who looks just a little too focused. He's convinced that this is a trap. He walks away, finds a pay phone, and calls Walt directly. No more apologies, no more hesitation. Jesse tells him he's coming for him, that he will get him where it really hurts. Walt stands still for a long moment. Then he picks up his phone again and calls Todd. It's time to talk to his uncle. Jesse needs to be dealt with permanently. In the desert, Jack agrees to carry out the hit on Jesse, but only if Walt gives him something in return. Or more specifically, he wants Walt to teach Todd how to cook the blue meth. We all know Walt doesn't want to agree, but he's cornered, so he has no choice. Jesse, meanwhile, is busy telling all to Hank and Gomez, and he recalls helping Walt load his cash with the guys. So after a few quick scare tactics, they get Huel to spill. He tells them that he knows that Walt put his cash in barrels and was planning on burying it. With this info, Jesse sends Walt a photo of a barrel full of cash and tells him that he found it. If Walt hangs up, he's burning it. Walt panics, pleads with Jesse not to do it. During the call, he admits that he poisoned Brock, says he made sure the boy would survive, and claims every terrible thing that he did was to protect Jesse. Walt then desperately races to the desert to save his cash and to talk Jesse down. On the route there, he sends the coordinates to Jack and his crew to come and get Jesse now, but he doesn't realize it's all a trap until Hank and Gomez show up. Walt tries to call things off with Jack, but his message doesn't quite get through, and Hank has got him dead to rights. They lock Walt in the SUV. Hank calls Marie, tells her it's over because they finally got him. But out on the horizon, the sound of cars can be heard, and it's certainly not going to be backup. Jack and his crew pull up fast. Walt begs them to stop, but they don't listen. Guns start firing, and Jesse and Walt dive for cover as bullets fly. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what I like to call going past the point of no return. The shootout ends in silence. The dust settling as Hank lies wounded and Gomez is already dead in the dirt. Jack approaches with his gun drawn, ready to finish what he started. And Walt, desperate in panic, throws himself between them, begging Jack to stop. He offers everything he has, every last dollar buried in the desert. If Jack will just let Hank live. Then Hank says one of the best lines in the entire show. "You're the smartest guy I ever met. You're too stupid to see." He made up his mind 10 minutes ago. After dealing with Hank, Jack's crew uncovers the barrels of money. And though they plan to take it all, Jack tells Walt that they'll leave him one. Not out of mercy, but because Todd still respects him. Well, at least they're not robbing him of all of his hard-earned money. As the gang are about to leave, Walt spots Jesse hiding under a car and coldly gives him up. They don't kill him, though. They know he's been snitching to the DEA, so before they do anything hasty, Jack and the gang want to know exactly what he told the cops. With the last of his strength, Walt rolls his barrel back home just in time for his family to return. He tries to get them to leave with him, but for once, Skylar puts her foot down and demands he gets the hell out of the house. And he does. But at the same time, he snatches Holly from her pen and takes her on the road. With the baby missing, and Walt being one of the most wanted men in America, he calls the house knowing the police will be listening in. Believe it or not, he actually does this to protect Skylar. He then leaves Holly in a fire station with a note that has her address on it and goes to meet the guy, the mysterious man who makes people disappear. In a dim back room behind a vacuum repair shop, Ed prepares two new identities. One for Walt, but also one for Saul. Yeah, Saul is on the run too. Heck, Walt even tries pressuring him to join him, but he's got a new life planned, working as a manager of a bakery in Nebraska. I wonder where that will lead. While Saul leaves for good, Jack's crew ransacks Marie's house and finds Jesse's confession tape. Jack wants Jesse dead for talking, but Todd, obsessed with impressing Lydia, convinces him to keep Jesse alive to cook. Todd claims the meth is now 92% pure, which is almost as good as Walt's. Jesse then tries to make a break for it, but is soon caught again. As punishment, they pay a little visit to Andrea. With his new identity ready, Ed takes Walt up in the mountains of New Hampshire and leaving him in a cold, empty cabin with nothing but canned food and the sound of his own breathing. That place is dark. He tells Walt he'll come once a month with supplies. But if Walt steps outside the perimeter of the land, that'll be it. He'll be on his own. No more protection. The months plow on, and Walt gets thinner and thinner, having to rely on Ed to hook him up to meds every month. Eventually, though, it begins to grind Walt down, and he can't take it. So he heads down to a local bar where he calls the DEA, telling them where he is. He even leaves the phone off the hook so that they can trace the call. He waits for his consequences to catch up to him. But as he does, the news on TV shifts to an interview with Gretchen and Elliot. After hearing how they talk about him, how they see him, he realizes he's not done. With his motivation sky high, Walt returns to New Mexico under cover of night, stealing a car and driving straight to the home of the old partners with a trunkload of cash. He easily slips into their luxury home unannounced, confronting them with calm precision and a quiet threat. Basically, he wants to use them as a filter for his money. They're super rich. They're connected to Walt. It would make sense. Say if they gave the family a handsome chunk of change. Well, Walt has that idea too. But to make sure they keep up their end of the bargain, he has a little motivation for them. Also, don't move. Don't dare move a muscle. Those hitmen marking them are really just the boys standing outside with laser pointers on their heads. Hey, if it works, it works. Now he's got that part of his life crossed off. Walt returns to his old house, now abandoned and falling apart, to retrieve the vial of poison he once hid in a wall socket. He then modifies his car, rigging a big machine gun to a rotating mount in the trunk, activated by a remote key. His plan is starting to take shape nicely. He then shows up at the cafe where Todd and Lydia meet regularly and slides into their booth, casually offering a new method for cooking meth without the usual stuff. Lydia plays along, pretending to be interested, but plans to lure him to Jack so that he can be killed. There's one more stop for Walter along the way, Skylar, and she actually hears him out. He gives her the lottery ticket with the GPS coordinates of the burial site, telling her she can use it to negotiate a deal with the authorities and get a final goodbye with Holly as she sleeps soundly in her crib. That night, Walt arrives at Jack's compound and parks near the building. He's brought inside, and Jack, with no time for pleasantries, orders his men to kill him. But Walt accuses Jack of working with Jesse, calling him a partner, saying that Jack owes him. Jack then drags Jesse from the meth lab, beaten and in chains, and throws him in front of Walt. Then in a flash, Walt tackles Jesse to the ground, grabbing the key fob and pressing it. The trunk pops open and the gun unleashes a barrage of bullets, sweeping across the room and killing nearly everybody. Jesse then uses chains to strangle Todd and finds the keys and frees himself. Walt hands Jesse a gun and tells him to do it to end it, but Jesse refuses, saying Walt should do it himself if that's what he wants. They share one last look, a quiet goodbye, before Jesse gets into the car and drives off into the night, finally free. There's only one last piece in the puzzle, Lydia. She calls Todd's phone, and Walt picks up telling her about what he's done and that she's next. Not because he's coming after her or anything, but because while they were at the cafe, Walt dropped poison into her drink. Serve her right for drinking that disgusting artificial sweetener. Anyway, with the cops on the horizon after hearing the bullets fly, Walt takes one final stroll into the meth lab, where it's revealed that he's taken a brutal bullet to the side. As sirens blare and flashing lights fill the lab, Walt's wound gets the better of him, and he passes out, slowly dying, surrounded by meth cooking equipment. That might be the end for Walt, but that's not the end for Jesse Pinkman. We've got to at least touch on what happens in the movie. After fleeing from Jack's compound, Jesse goes on the run. He absolutely does not want to get back into the criminal game. All he wants is a new life. He visits people like his old crew who help him dodge in and out of view of the police. Jesse then finds some of Todd's stashed cash and uses it to go back to the guy and get a new life in Alaska, where to this day he's living his best life. Now that is what I call a happy ending. But that's it for the show. Every year or so, I really make sure that I sit down and watch this entire beast of a series. It really is one of the finest pieces of television of all time. I really enjoyed every second of that rundown, and I hope you did too. Let me know down below what your favorite episode is or your favorite character from the show. Who do you think deserve a spinoff? Hey, maybe we'll get a series of the big guy in the future. I don't know. But for now, I'll see you all next time. See you.